welcome to World Values Day 2022. My name is Kevin Cottam, and I'm really grateful to be here with you celebrating the power and mystery of values. Values are what unifies us. This is really extremely important because each one of us has so many values that are sitting inside of our cosmic soup, which I like to call, and I will explain that a little bit later. But in my coaching, this is one of the things that I believe is the game changer. It helps people to have better decisions, communicate better, use them as communication and tools, as well as competencies. This is an extremely important thing for our behaviors because values are attached to our behaviors. I am a global nomad, a leadership coach, and also an author of The Nomadic Mindset, Never Settle for Too Long, and also Aha Mother's Pearls. And I have a new upcoming book called The Nomadic Pause. But today, I want to share with you the importance of values. And we will detail that further along. But first of all, the theme of this year is community. And community means common and unity. It is what is common to us, our values that are common to us, and this is how we unite. Teams, families, all are communities, and larger communities and tribes, perhaps. When I was working and doing my research for the nomadic mindset, I spent time with nomadic cultures in Mongolia, as well as in Kenya and in Morocco. And during my time there, I realized that one of the most important things was community for them. And I will get into this further as we go along today. But first of all, let us talk a little bit more about what the world situation is like. We're in a period right now where the world is kind of really crazy, with the war in Ukraine, and there's also the Iranian situation. We also have the economic situation, which is going a bit nutty. And at the same time, we have the climate change and all of this. And something needs to bring us together. And one of the things that can do this is values. And values are just one of those things that I will get into in a more descriptive as we go along, is that I'll talk about what are values, how do they form, and then also how to be able to use them as a competency or as a tool. And we'll just talk about that. But also with my guests, we will talk about the different aspects of values and how important they are to them, and also how do they find their values. And this is something that we can all really think about. So let's start off just with myself at this point in time, because I want to share with you this a little bit of myself and my journey and how I got to these values in many ways, and so that we can talk about this. I grew up on a very big lake, and this is the lake behind me on the west coast of Canada. But today, what I'm suggesting is that myself, I'm appearing to you. I thought, what are the values that would support me in this conversation? And this is presence, communicate, calm, and be collaborative. And those are the values that I'm coming today and setting this intention. And that's one of the things that we can do with our lives, is to set our intention for our day, also a conversation, also a decision-making process that we needed to do, but is a setting an intention of our values that we want to show up with. And I'm not sure if any of you think about that, because a lot of us are just on treadmill and just rotating, and we just don't think about them, because these are the invisible in many ways. They're the intangible of the values. But let me say a little bit about myself. So when I started to think about today and values, I started to look back and connect the dots of my life. And I started to look at them from a values consciousness. And what I saw, that when I was very young, I was living on this lake, and then I went and became a figure skater. And then as a figure skater, I became a champion. And then I went on to university, and then I became a dancer. And then at that point, after that, is that I collaborated everything together, and I started to work as a choreographer for figure skaters. My whole process was really about supporting them, inspiring them, being creative with them. So all of these values I lived, and it was all about them. It's about how could I bring the best out in them. And so I was acting on those values, but I didn't realize at that time I was acting on these values. They were just something. And so then I went from there, and as I was saying earlier, that I did the directed and choreographed the closing ceremonies for the Olympics in '88. That took a different set of values because this was a community. This was a team, a very big team, but we were also doing it for a bigger purpose. And that bigger purpose was the pride of the country. So those took a variety of different values, which were collaborative, which communication in different ways, clarity. It also was coming together. So it was all sorts of different aspects of values which were coming to the fray. But when I look back, this is now me seeing this because it wasn't when I was doing it. And then I went on to do a variety of other things and then became a coach, as I am now, a professional speaker and an author. And their latest book is The Nomadic Mindset, Never Settle for Too Long. But with that, I think it's really important to be able to see how our values have actually allowed us to actually be the best we can be. And we do this, as I said, we do it on an automatic basis. A fellow by the name of Dr. Peter Hall, and he says that values are ideals that are given, that are meaning and significance to our lives, expressed through priorities. So the key words there are ideals, meaning, significance, priorities. And those are what values are. But then where are these values? And how do we find these values? So we ask the question, as was put also earlier, the importance by Bonta, what is important to you? This is a key question when you're looking for what are my specific values? Or if it's the community, what is the community to hold? What is the values of this community to make this community whole? What's important to it? Now, many people talk about a variety of different types of values. And I'm going to talk about two: normative values, and that asks the question how we should live. And descriptive values, which we're going to talk about mainly in this particular rest of the session, is that how we want to live. So there's two different things there, should and want. Should is often coming from a variety of other disciplines, such as religion or through politics or family, and this is how you should be. You should do this, you should do that. And these are values that are created. But sometimes we just don't know what is the want. And that is the one that is important for us because those are the drivers. Those are the drivers that move us towards our purpose. This is what we act upon. And so how is this all developed? How do they develop? All right. So I would like to share with you, it's like an iceberg. I mean, many of us know this iceberg philosophy, and that is that the huge amount of the iceberg is below. So the unknown, the place which is the internal, or the external, which is the top of the iceberg. So values are informed by beliefs. The beliefs are opinions that we may have about a situation or a thought, such as, I believe I am worthy. So then your values start to form. And then your attitudes, which are all under the water, and then the behaviors of how you're acting it. These are formed. Now, values are formed by a variety of different situations in our life. So in the early days of our lives, up until maybe about 18 or 20, all of our values are created through family, through friends, through in the playground, through education, and the overall general culture that we live in. And those are the values. But then when we start to work, we start to find other values. What do we want? Why do we want to live our life? And those are very important to us as well. So we're increasing the number. And now the other thing is that as we get older, we then become more selfless a lot of the time for most of us. And we start to look in from a higher vision of what values are. And so there's different values. But that doesn't mean to say age. You can have it still at a young age as these more visionary values. Now, I like to explain values as they're in the cosmic soup. So in other words, it's like a cream soup that's sitting inside of you. And research has shown that we have about 500 values that are sitting in that cosmic soup. And in the tool that I use, we rank 128. And you may say 128 values. I mean, that's a lot. And things that we don't even think about. But in the ranking, you start to rank what are your priorities. And that is how you find out what your specific values are for that specific moment in time. because our values are developmental, as I said earlier, but they also shift and change depending on our situation. So for example, you may be in a job and then you're fired, and then something happens to you. Your values start to shift. You find a new job and now your life has changed. So your values may have shifted in between that time. Or as you're getting older, for example, your values change about how you see the world and the life. So they shift and change, and as organizations shift and change, they forget to change their values because sometimes the values are not useful in today. With the changes they may be using or because of the external influences through climate change and all sorts of things. But the values are movable and they shift and they change. But we can look at them as tools and as competencies, which I'll talk about in a little bit later. But these are how your values are sort of created. And there are multiples, as I said, there are so many. And it's important that we find out what they are so we can name them. Because naming them gives us clarity. Naming them gives us a benefit to be more confident. Naming them becomes much more of a tool for us to be able to use in conversations or negotiations, or even just like I said today, how do I want to show up in this conversation with you today? So one of the things that I also found out about community, it comes back from my work that I did in my nomadic work. Many people know about my nomadic work and my extravagant time, I suppose it is. And I spent time writing my book, The Nomadic Mindset, Never Settle for Too Long. And I believe that there's a really strength in understanding where the indigenous and nomadic cultures come from and the learning that they can give to us and values. And one of them is about community. And let me share a little bit about this nomadic experience. So one of the things which was really interesting to me, and when I was in the Sahara, when I was spending time with the Berbers and a variety of the other tribes that were there, I went out with my driver and my guide and also my photographer. And we went looking throughout the Sahara in a big Jeep. And it was fun, but it was a rickety old Jeep. And we ended up finding a little house with some people that were there. Very few, but just the husband, a child, and his wife, and I think a sister of the wife. Anyway, but what happened was we met him, we went in, we had a conversation. And the conversation went over the wonderful Moroccan tea, which is beautiful. It's that mint tea, and it's a very small little shot glass, and it's an event. It's called the tea ceremony in many ways. But this is about finding the values that are with the other people. And it is about the safety of the road for them. As to who are these people? None of us knew each other. So there had to be some sort of curiosity. So the master of the house, who was creating the tea, he had conversations in Arabic, which I didn't understand Arabic. And after the third cup of tea, my guide said, you can now ask your questions. I was kind of like, well, why now am I asking the questions? But I found out later that they had laid the ground of respect and some trust. And through the conversations about me being in Mongolia and also with the Maasai in Kenya. So this built a camaraderie, it built respect, it was developing rapport. So I asked my questions, and first world questions, of course. But anyway, then I asked then my master of the house, he asked a question. And he said, because he was referring to the other nomadic cultures that I had been to, he said, what makes us similar? Now, he didn't ask what makes us different because he already knew through the conversation what made us different, but he was looking at what made us similar. And I had to think for a second. And I realized that it was these common values of survival and of safety, support for the community. Because you have to understand that it's not all about me in these cultures a lot of the time. It is more about the community support for each other. And so that was what's so very interesting to me, is they can give us a lot of interest in and understanding about community. Because, as I said, it's about support, safety, empathy, leadership. It's all of these which are bringing the community together towards a common goal. And that is exactly what we want to do, right? Within organizations, we want to gather people to come together. So that's community. Now let's see, what does the word mean, community? Community is a word which is a group of people who share something in common. So the word community, common plus unity. So what is value? What is a value? What are the values which are common to each other? What are the beliefs of commonality that they have together? And then what are the behaviors that come together with that? But then there's a unity around bringing everyone together. As a young woman said to me, a Maasai woman, she said, unity is very vital to us as a community and as a tribe and as a clan. She said, this is what is the most important thing. That's what saves us. This is what brings us forward. This is what gives us pride. And that is exactly what you want within an organization as well. Now I want to invite Agnes to come on because I want to talk a little bit about community, but also her experience with values. So who is Agnes? Agnes is a very good friend of mine, Agnes Tarnay, and she is Hungarian. She lives in Brussels and she works at the European Union. And let me get this title right, because this could be a challenge for me. She is the head of the Italian language unit in the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union. And she's not speaking on behalf of the European Union or the Council, she's speaking about herself. And she's also a DTM, which means a Distinguished Toastmaster. And she's a great speaker, a great facilitator, and a super friend. So let's bring on Agnes and we'll have a little conversation about values.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for that wonderful introduction. And as you say, I am not speaking on behalf of the Council or of the European Council. Currently, that is where I work, but I did also many other things, from conference interpreting to event management to executive coaching and a couple of other things. So I am bringing that experience also to this conversation.
Great. Wonderful, Aggie. And so I wanted to know, tell me a little bit more about translation and how translation was for you, and also translation, which it might mean to values now.
Oh, well, how much time have we got? Because this is a vast topic. I studied languages at university, so my diploma says high school language teacher for English and German. That allowed me to get into translation. And for those who know the profession, know also that translations mean written work. And when you do the same translation at conferences or meetings, then it's interpreting. In general, it's translation. I always considered myself much more of an interpreter, because 90% of the time I did interpreting and only 10, maybe 20% of the time written translation. And it was some time ago when you, Kevin, kept on referring to me as translator. And in the beginning, I was really, no, yes, I was a translator, but I'm no longer a translator. Why do you say that? And because of these conversations also, I realized that how I saw translation back then, when I was doing or not much doing it, was in a very narrow way. So to me, it was an important work, a work which had value. However, it was off the mainstream, because you either translated something which will be discussed or what was discussed. And it gave me this narrowness, and I no longer wanted to be associated with something which has a narrow scope. But of course, translation is much more than expressing what is said in one language in another language in an accurate and professional, unbiased manner. We do translation all the time because we translate messages around us, we translate conversations, we translate what is coming our way, what is happening to us. By translation, we give it meaning, we interpret it. Is it this one or is it that one? What did you mean? Do I understand you correctly? So I'm seeing translation in a much, much, much broader sense. And I'm not saying that translation as such has changed. It's how I see it and what are the values that I attach to it. That is what has changed and what has expanded. And it is a very valuable activity, which includes professionalism, it includes accuracy, be free of biases, the dedication to high professional standards, etc., etc. So there are so many things in it.
So if you could translate, what were translate the values that you're showing up to share with us today? What did you appear? What came for you, that translation of the values that you're using today? What would they be, those values?
One would be holistic, in the sense that I prepared for this conversation. I thought about some questions about the values. I reflected. And then when the conversation started, then I was willing to go with the flow, be adaptable, not insist on what I prepared, but see how the conversation goes, what will come up. I also brought in intuition, in the sense that, okay, what wants to be said will be said, and allowing also to respond to whatever is happening, what you say, what is in the air. And also integration. Integration now means to connect the dots in my own head around values, to connect my dots and your dots, and the dots of the other participants, the other speaker, guest speaker, and also those who may ask some questions, and also connect the dots in the broadest possible sense of around values and why are values important in our own life, in the life of a community, of an organization, and of the world as such.
Thank you. And so just talk a little bit about how can this be translated into unity, like a community, and how is this important, would you say? Especially, you've had a lot of work experience with teams, and now as a head of unit, I mean, you deal with that. And also as a DTM, you had to deal with not just individuals, but teams and so communities, because Toastmasters is a big community.
Toastmasters is also a large community, and I'm very grateful for all the wonderful experiences I had there. And our friendship may have never happened without Toastmasters. And how to translate it? Community is interesting. As you explained, there is the common and there is the unity in it. And what I find interesting also, that for the nomads, the community is the overriding value, and the individual comes after the community, if I understand the concept correctly. Whereas in our world, in the non-nomadic world, very often we go for our own individual goals, own ambitions, and not necessarily for that of the community, whether the community is a small team or whether the community is an organization. And when, for example, I want to set up a charity organization or a foundation, then I define the values I want to go by, and then I will look for people who share those values, or I will attract people to work with me who share those values. And this is how we create a community. In organizations, very often, there is already a set of values in place. Ideally, the organization thought about the values, and people working for that organization share those values. Otherwise, performance goes down, individual motivation goes down, and ultimately a colleague with a lot of expertise may leave the organization. But there, when an individual comes into the organization, then, okay, the person will have to see what are the values and how are my personal values and the values of the organization in alignment. And it is, in my view, also the responsibility or the task of a leader or the leadership of an organization to help the newcomers to be able to recognize these values and also share those values. So make that alignment happen, bringing, if there is a gap between the two, then see how they could be brought together. And the point you said also is very important, that values are not like the pyramids, which were built once and they stay there. They evolve, and for organizations, it is also important to revisit these values. Are the values which we defined a certain while ago still valid? Do they help us meet the challenges of the current environment? And that is one of the key aspects for me to make sure that we work together in such a way that we move forward as a team, and also that while we do that, the individuals are aligned to the values we as a community stand for.
Wonderful. And that,
am I making myself clear? I'm not sure.
yeah, making yourself clear. And what that is a translation that you're asking them to do. Is to translate that to the individuals, and to be able to the individual then to be able to translate it back. Are they a fit for this organization? Are they a fit for this community? And I think that is also, that's really great what you said there. So cool. But we're going to need to move on, because we need to finish up some of this stuff and also bring in Maria. But it's thank you so much, Aggie, and we'll talk a little bit later. Okay.
Yes, and yes, and this goes for not only for translations. This goes for no matter what kind of activity or an organization is pursuing. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. It was great. What Maggie was just saying, which I think is really important, and what I would like to bring in, is this wonderful quote by Roy Disney. And he says that it's hard not to make decisions when you know what your values are. And so knowing what your specific values are, because now we can use them as competencies and tools. So competencies and tools, and let me share with you a little story about this. So I had a client, and we did a variety of values ranking. And he was always talking in a lot in his conversations about ethics. And that was a very strong value for him. And he was very emotional about it. And he went and he talked to me about a situation that he had with his boss, and his boss did something that he did not agree with, and he thought it was a little bit corrupt in some ways. And so it didn't fit well, because he also was a lawyer and he thought very ethically in the situation. So I said, okay, let's just get your values out, because I was curious what other values might be very important for him to have a conversation with his boss. And so he got them out, he looked at them, and he said, no, my boss wants me to appear before him with this value lead. He wants to see me as a leader. That's how he would want me to approach this conversation. So I watched him when he said that, and his whole body language shifted and changed. There was not emotion. He was very clear. He was very clear about what this. So anyway, even though he wasn't clear about ethics, but the point here is that one of them was very emotional and the other was not emotional and had a response to him. And so I asked him what the conversation, how it might go. And it was a very, very different type of conversation than the one he had previously spoken to me about. So sometimes what happens is that if we don't use our values as our competencies or tools, we could get ourselves into the problem, just as what the case of Einstein, when he says about insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's where it gets into trouble. But what happens if you know your values and you keep going back to them and going, like with today, I asked my guests to find out, what are the values you're showing up with? Because they may be different in a different situation. That's one of the keys here, is that we just go blanket values. But you know what? Most people don't know what their values are. And I can say that specifically because I ask many times to clients, my coaching clients, and what are your values? Can you name your values? And most of the time they look at me blankly. And that's an indication that we use the word values, but we haven't really dissected that into what are the terms, what are the words. And then once you start the conversation, then they start rolling out, because that's how we find them out and how we can really see what is really touching to people. This is something that I think is extremely important. The values as competencies and tools. They will benefit us on so many different levels of confidence, of clarity, of decision-making, of communication, everything. I mean, the world certainly needs a little bit of that right now. And even though we have different definitions and a biasness to our situations in life, or even the location you are in the world, and many of you from different parts of the world that are here today, which is so beautiful. And the values are different in different cultures, but they are also, there's a lot of similarity, a common. And that is what I found when I sat in that little hut in the Sahara, that there was a huge amount of commonality. And as I've talked with Aggie a little bit about decision-making and also negotiation, is that you look and you search for what is common, first of all, before you go into the differences. Because if you don't have a common ground, which can be the values or what you want to achieve and what the direction is, you're going to have a very hard and rough journey. And that's what was happening in that little house in the Sahara, was finding out what's the balance, what was common to us, so that we could then have that conversation and we knew that there was unity around the table. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about how I approach the values and how I use them. I use a tool which is called Point of Value, and this is the website for it. And it is a beautiful little tool, and we rank 128 values, and we do it online. And then after that, there is a debriefing situation. And that debriefing situation is done through looking at 8 or 9 of our core values, the top ranking ones. And we look at them through the definition and also storytelling. So what does it mean to you? Where do they start? But then I also love to do it in the sense of embodiment. So somatic work. What does that mean for some of you? That means, how does it connect into my body? You know, because it is a physical thing, these values, they sit inside of us. And so I ask the questions, where do you feel this value in which body part? Or what is there a color that's associated with it? Or what is a symbol? Now this starts to expand the feeling of it, of the values, and we can use them much more holistically, as Aggie was talking about, the holistic value. So I'd love to bring on Maria, and Maria Jorgensen is from Denmark. And she had worked in Belgium and Brussels. That's where she lives now with her husband and her child. And she is a life and business coach. And she's worked at the European Union in different institutions for the last 15 years. But then she had a big transformation. And then she became this coach, and her specificness is that she is working with female expats, which I think is great, worldwide, to listen to their longings and to create the life they dream of. And she uses this in her one-to-one coaching and also as a transformational speaker as well. Hi, Maria. Thank you so much. So I would love to know, what are the values that you're showing up with today that you brought to this conversation, how you wanted to appear?
That was openness and sharing my knowledge, what I've learned to be true, and also curiosity.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So can you just share with us, I mean, thank you for bringing those values and showing up with them, which is always the best way. When you thought about that, about those values, how did that make you feel?
Expanding in a way. I wanted to be open to learn new things and at the same time share what I know, both what I've experienced with values, but also curious, I think. Yeah, to use one of the values, to dig deeper and to share and to exchange.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And, you know, we went through the process of looking at your values, and I'd just like you to share with you your experience, because I think that this is very powerful, and this is the power of values that I would talk about and it's also the mystery at the same time. And so I'd just like you to share with me a little bit about that, or with our audience.
Yes, sure. Yes. So for me, this our debrief of the tool was very powerful, and it's the reason why I'm a coach today and why I changed my way completely in my professional life and also how I live my life today. So to give a bit of background, so I had been working at that point, I had been working for 15 years for the institution of the European Union. And 13 of those years were amazing. I loved it. The last 2 was a bit of a different experience, as where I worked there was a quite toxic environment. So after having been there for 2 years in that environment, I decided to leave, which was a very, very big decision for me. But I left, and without any other job. But I left because it was the most healthy thing to do, because people went down with stress one after the other. So I was listening to myself, and I left. So when I called you, that was after 2-3 months after that, and I was starting to think, okay, so what do I do now? I need to call Kevin, and because we knew each other from earlier, where we had some sessions. So we decided to do this value, and I did all the questions online, and we had a double session where we debriefed. And the way you did it with me was that you showed me all my values that had come out from the tool, electronic tool, and debriefed me on it. There were 7 or 8 core values, and there were then sub values under each one, and that in itself was powerful to see. And then you asked me per core value to put each one on a piece of paper. And you asked me, as I remember it, you asked me to give it a color, and then a characteristic, and then a symbol. But you asked me 3 questions to kind of integrate it, and then told me to write it in that color on a paper, one by one, and put them somewhere on my living room floor, where I thought that should be, which I did. And then per value, we went together and stood by the value, and I fell into it. And so it was kind of integrated. And then you asked me to take a step back and look at my value map, which was a map of me, of my personality. So I took a step back, and I was standing there and looking at all the papers on my floor. And I got so emotional, and the tears started to run down my face, because I just realized I hadn't been true to myself and to these values for so long. So it was such a powerful moment, with a lot of sadness and surprise, and also a very emotional moment, because it was kind of getting the mirror up and seeing myself and seeing the core of myself. And just wanted to give myself a big hug, and say, okay, I'm here, I'm not going to leave you again. So it was a beautiful moment, and it was there that the whole shift happened for me, because I realized that it's time to do something completely different than what I've done before. To live my values, to really be with them, be with me, and what feels true to me.
Wonderful. And thank you so much. I mean, I remember this session, and it was a beautiful session. It was very heart-rending in many ways to see your experiences, and everyone's experience is very different. But I know that Adriana has also done hers virtually, and it was also a big moment for her as well. And I believe that these are big moments when we find these inner jewels, I believe, that are sitting there in our cosmic soup, as I say, and we need to pull them out one by one. But what's in that soup is the broccoli, the turmeric,
exactly.
the cauliflower, all of these, and put names to them, and that's really quite exciting.
Yeah.
So now when you've done that, now that you moved into coaching and also speaking in this particular realm, and so how do you see community, and how do you see this, and or maybe even more to the point that we had talked earlier about, how do you see this, the value of this, especially in recruitment? So there's two questions there, but you can either answer either one of them.
Well, what it makes me think about when you ask me that question is that I experience and I notice that a number of companies, they define this, you check their website and they have this fancy values, and it seems like that it's really integrated in their work. But when you talk a bit to the people in the organization, you discover that it's not really integrated. That is something that have been defined by the upper management, because because it's their values. But unless you ask people to feed into that and really integrate it in how you see your daily life and how you work and your work, it's not gonna. It's not making any sense. So in terms of recruitment, I mean, the ideal scenario would be defining these key values with your staff and really have it integrated in your culture as a company. And even when you recruit people, that asking them the right questions to make sure that they have these values. And if they don't, even though they have the right CV matching what you're looking for, if they don't have the values, then you don't take them. So really integrating that, and how how values can really be such a powerful tool, both how you run your company, but also what you do when you recruit people, because that's really to take the ultimate to ownership of wellness of your staff, of creating a workplace where it makes sense, where people feel seen and they feel that really create that community, that unity part in the community world, right? That's how I see it, the ideal situation when you talk about recruitment and using values actively.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you very much for that. And I think that the problem is that we're running out of time now, and so I want to be very honest with everyone.
Okay.
But I love what you were talking about, and I would just like to follow up just in finishing up with today, and that is that, you know, the tool that we used, and I was just came off a session actually an hour before this session with point of value, and we were talking about the new aspect of it, which is really about looking at culture and the team, the culture team, the values team, and how we can use not only personal values to first of all understand those, but then take that into the community values, and so the team values. And I think this is very powerful what you're saying, and how do we align that? Because, you know, each unit needs to work together, or each department needs to work together amongst the mega satellites of a variety of different departments within an organization, right? And so they all have to come together at some point. So I agree with what you're saying, and I think it's important that we need to know that up front, so that it also helps in the benefits of building confidence, and it builds the community, it brings harmony, it brings some sort of peace ultimately that you want to lead towards. So values are very important, and thank you very much, Maria. So for everyone,
and can I just add one little thing?
Sure.
Just to what you're saying, it is also a tool that you can use to keep each other accountable. You know, because if you have defined your values based on, okay, how is our group dynamic when we are at our best as a team? How is our dynamic? How do we communicate? How do we treat each other? What is ultimately important to us? What feels true for us as a team? And really building on that, I find it so important to and really use it actively, also to remind each other when someone slips, when someone, you know, are stressed and under pressure and so on. And really, you know, remind each other lovingly, you know, of the values that you keep together, so you stick to them.
Yes, lovingly. I like this, lovingly. All right, wonderful. We will get to some questions and answers, but just want to sort of finish up with this, because I think this is a lovely conversation. We could go on for a long time having conversation about value. But as you can see, there is a mystery as to finding these values. And there's also a mystery in what are they, not only within organizations, but there's also this power that they have, and the power that we as individuals have, and the power that we have as a community when we come together with them on so many different aspects, because this is our behavior. Just wanted to share with you, if you want to connect with me, that this is my LinkedIn. You can take that, but I think most of you already have it. And this is how we connected. And also, if you're interested in understanding a little bit more, this is my book, and you can see that it's on Amazon. But also there are a variety of different links. You will find some information about the work that I do with values, and individually as well as with teams. And just so that you have this content for yourself, if you find it interesting. And also, if you find it interesting, to share, you know, the importance of values with all of your communities, but also yourself. It always starts with yourself and then moving outwards. So I want to thank you very much. And I just want to share with you that it's really great that you could come here today and to be here with us in celebrating World Values Day. And does anyone else have anything you want to say?
This was about community, Kevin. This was about sharing. This was about bonding. This was about communication, about presence, about a lot of values this past 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for creating that for.
Yeah. All right, we can sign off now and say toodaloo and enjoy.